Good morning, everybody. What's happening, YouTube? What's cracking, guys? It is Friday, March 27th, and we're going to be doing a video today titled "Landlords Are Bad." So that's what we'll be talking about today. Before we get into this, today is the 27th. I was very happy to see that the Netflix series Ozarks comes back today, or I think it's probably on Netflix right now. So if you are out of work, off of work, sitting home ripping bowls and rolling joints today, Ozark is an excellent series. I don't know if you guys have seen. I'm surprised by how many people haven't gotten into that one. That's one of my favorite series on Netflix, probably of all time. Really great series there. Put out another video earlier this morning. YouTube actually approved my appeals. I said the C word, the beer cough word, in a couple videos. They got demonetized. I actually made a video kind of talking about why YouTubers won't say that word. And surprisingly, once those videos hit 1,000 views, I was able to request a manual appeal, and both were approved for all advertisers. So that was a pleasant surprise as well. In today's video, I wanted to comment on a post in the real estate investing subreddit, r/real estate investing. And I've kind of mentioned in a lot of videos lately that there's like a very anti-landlord sentiment going on lately. It's as if landlords are, these rich monocle-wearing guys who are lighting cigars with $100 bills. And the reality is, well, there are some huge property owners out there and mega corporations that own a lot of apartment complexes and things like that. And there are people that own hundreds of doors. And, there's really, in my opinion, nothing wrong with that. But your average landlord is probably someone like you or me who's got, a single rental property. Maybe they upgraded homes and wound up keeping the first home as a rental property. Some people choose to have rental properties as opposed to putting their money in the stock market. Other people, maybe you got to move out of state for temporarily for a job, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and it doesn't really make sense to sell a house that you're going to wind up coming back to. So a lot of people become accidental landlords, and that was kind of my situation. I would like to continue getting more rental properties. I feel like I have more control over that than I do the stock market. It's income producing, so it's almost like a stock that spits out a dividend. You actually have a little bit more control over how you manage and what you do with your rental property, whereas when senators and congressmen are insider trading and hiding the coronavirus, it's kind of like stock market manipulation. You have very little control. We kind of saw how over the past 2 weeks, we lost 5 years worth of gains in some cases. Although things have rebounded quickly there. And before we get into the story, I saw another interesting post on r/landlord or real estate investing or something like that. And some guy was like, "Oh, everybody hates on Section 8. I'm sitting kind of pretty right now." And it's kind of true. A lot of people do hate on Section 8, and Section 8 does have its issues, definitely. A lot of people don't want to bring a third party, especially the government, in between them and their tenant. I understand all those things. I actually just recently got rid of a Section 8 tenant in December. Maybe I shouldn't say got rid of them. They just, they wound up not renewing their lease after 2 or 3 years. But in a time right now when I made a video the other day showing how my property manager had sent me an email saying they expect 50 to 75% of people either not to pay rent or to pay partial rent. They were working on negotiating partial rent. And in a time where a lot of people are unable to collect rent, people who are doing landlords who have Section 8 properties, they're at least guaranteed, like 80, 90% of the rent. In the case of my property, it rented for, I think it was like $13.62 or something like that. My mortgage payment was only like $740 or $780. And the government paid we'll say like $11.62, and the people were responsible for the difference between $11.62 and $30. The people basically paid about $150 a month. So even if my tenants were unable to pay me, I was still guaranteed $1,163 from the government, which more than covered my my mortgage, property taxes, insurance, all that jazz, and even cash flowed a little bit. So that's one attractive thing about Section 8 properties. On the downside, when my tenants wound up moving out, they wound up overstaying, which kind of threw off my schedule a little bit. They kind of tore up the house a bit, so I wound up, I think I spent $3,000 repainting the whole place, plus had to do a couple other fixes. So I'm probably into it for, I don't know, $3,500, $4,000. So if you think about it, even though you are guaranteed rent from a Section 8 tenant, how many months of a property sitting vacant or me not collecting rent, I guess would be better. How many months of me not collecting rent would wind up equating to what I wound up having to pay to kind of fix up the property? Let's say $800 a month, 8, 16, 24, 32. If we want to go 4,000, we could say that's 4 to 5 months. So if I had a traditional tenant in, a conventional tenant in who didn't pay me rent, it would take 4 to 5 months to equal kind of the damage that the Section 8 tenants did. Although I guess I can't really look at it that way, because eventually I would have needed new carpet. Eventually the place would have needed to be painted, etc. Anyhow, I've rambled on long enough. Let's get into this. Actually, I'm going to ramble on a little bit more. So I was kind of talking about how landlords are the evil guys here, and I'm even kind of starting to see an attitude online that like property ownership itself is like a bad thing, which I don't know, blows my mind. But I'm sorry, I was just looking at some girl. Where I'm going with this is I really don't get how landlords come out of this being the good guy. A lot of people say, well, having a roof over your head or shelter is a universal basic right. And I'm not even necessarily going to disagree with that. A lot of people say, food, having something to eat, clean water are universal rights. I'm not going to disagree with that necessarily either. A lot of people say medical care is a universal right. And I do think all people should have these things, and I would love if all people could have these things. The one thing I think people need to realize is that nothing is free. The money has to come from somewhere. Even if the money's coming from the government, in turn that's coming from taxes, and there are not enough billionaires, even if you took all their money to pay for all of this stuff, which means it's going to trickle down to the middle class as well. And if you're willing to pay higher taxes for that stuff, that's great. Maybe we could have that discussion, and maybe that's something that we want to do. But I kind of get the people being upset at the unequal distribution of wealth, and even at billionaires. But like I said, your average landlord probably has a property or two. They're a middle class person trying to get by like you. And I don't get how landlords are the bad guy. And I also don't get how in this situation, landlords are the ones who seem to be expected to take losses. Nobody's asking grocery stores to pass out free food. Nobody seems to be asking doctors to work for free. There's all these other services that we need and that we're using. I don't see Comcast waiving cable bills during this time. Netflix hasn't slashed my monthly fee. So I'm not really sure how landlords are the ones who we all expect to take it on the head, but nobody else is. And even the governments, a lot of city governments, state governments are freezing evictions, halting rent. And it's very easy to be generous with other people's money. If the government actually wants to do something, maybe they should step up and do something to compensate landlords that would allow landlords to waive rent. And actually, most of the landlords that I know personally or that I see on forums and things like that seem to be kind of bending over backwards to take care of their tenants. Pretty much everybody across the board is waiving late fees. Most people are either accepting deferred payments or basically only collecting what they need to cover not only collecting what they need to cover their mortgage. Like, I've actually seen landlords being pretty good in this situation. I'm sure somebody can drop a comment and tell me how their landlord's hounding them and telling them they need money or they're going to be out on the streets. But overwhelmingly, I think landlords have been pretty good about this. But like I said, it just really blows my mind how landlords seem to be the ones who are expected to support people. Like, maybe people should be upset at their employer for not paying them a living wage or not paying them through this situation. Maybe people should be upset at the government, because if anybody should be expected to help you out or help you live for free, it should probably be the government, not some private citizen who just happens to own a rental property. All that said, let's get into this post. Here we are, 10 minutes in, I'm just getting into it. Post in real estate investing. In real estate investing, these forums have been kind of getting like spammed by like the Bernie Sanders crowd, the anti-work crowd, etc. But he says, please don't downvote me. I'm simply trying to understand, do any of you not feel guilty for attempting to charge people for shelter during a global pandemic, which everyone is told to stay home? I understand the simpleton arguments, like how can someone not afford 1 month's rent without income, and you shouldn't have signed a lease if you can't afford it. But in my eyes, these arguments don't hold any validity during the unprecedented times we live in. The average American family couldn't afford a $400 emergency before this happened, so how can they be expected to handle an entire month's rent, groceries, utilities, and other payments? When so many people's jobs have closed, how can one genuinely believe it's justified to charge people for one place that provides them safety in a time like this? So again, I ask, why is it a private landlord who has bills to pay? Why is it his responsibility to take care of you and not the government? And also, during a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, Why aren't doctors offering free care? Why aren't dentists offering free care? Why isn't Netflix free? Why isn't your cable bill free? I get that shelter is more of a requirement, but that's probably something that the government should take care of and not a private citizen for you. Let's see. Edit. I'd like to thank all of you that took time to attempt to have a constructive conversation. Let's see. If you spent time reading through the sub, the vast majority of property owners reached out on their own to work with their tenants who may require assistance. This was done proactively without the government pressure. There are bad landlords. There are bad tenants. In my experience, both of these camps are overall the minority. I would agree with that. You can further break down bad landlords and tenants into amateurs and professionals. An amateur landlord may be someone who, with their first property, has no idea what they're doing and is a bad landlord by the virtue of inexperience. They will typically either fail with time or learn to become a better landlord. A bad amateur tenant may be a college kid who has never rented before and leaves it a mess, poorly maintained because they've never been out on their own. Okay, that's a long comment. Let's see. I think a lot of landlords are open to pausing rents, but the mortgages and taxes and utilities need to be paused as well. It's simply not financially feasible for many landlords to not collect rent when they're still responsible for these payments. Let's see. I'm trying to find ones that aren't like super long. Want a philosophical, I probably can't say that word, approach. Hobbes and the social contract may provide some answer. Want a pragmatic economic argument? Come to this sub. Want an argument against the system? Marx, John Rawls, Friedrich von Hayek. Please understand these fine folks on this sub will not provide you with many answers to your class warfare, economic system discontentment. They have an income and they will fight for that income within the system they participate in. I have skimmed through this sub for years, and the folks here that have posted have provided a balanced approach of compassion and pragmatism to this. Be warned that your moralism has no right answer, only more finger-pointing, contrarianism. There will be no perfect answer or outcome to suffering within the context of a mass event like this. You know, I saw a video from Dave Ramsey the other day, and I started making a video about it. I hadn't posted it yet, but Dave Ramsey basically said, you know, if $1,200 is going to change your world, you were kind of fucked in the first place. And that's not to say we shouldn't be giving people $1,200, but it's just something to realize. If $1,200 is going to change your world, you were pretty fucked to begin with. I feel bad for people who are living check to check, who don't have the education or skills to necessarily improve their situation, and who really don't have money to save, don't have money to invest. But, I mean, if we're honest, a lot of us, if you get every new iPhone that comes out, over the course of the last 2 or 3 years that you potentially could have kept one phone, that's 2 to 3 months worth of rent or 2 to 3 months worth of a mortgage right there. If you have a $150 or $200 Comcast cable bill per month, you know, that's potentially over the course of the year, that's a month or two's worth of rent right there. I'm pretty cheap. I'm pretty frugal naturally. You know, I would love to have cable, but to me, it's just not worth the money. So, you know, I have a harder time feeling bad for people who eat out 4 nights a week, have the newest iPhone, have nice clothes, a $700 car payment, and then now can't pay their $900 rent, right? Like, I feel bad for everybody right now. This is kind of unexpected, but, you know, there's certain people that I'm definitely much more sympathetic to. Here's a good comment. You are assuming that we as landlords are all some rich land barons who light our cigars with $100 bills, when in fact most of us are everyday citizens like you, whose income depends upon tenants that we, as you say, shelter, as well as provide the maintenance and upkeep so they don't have to worry about it. So when a tenant can't afford to pay their rent because their income has been affected, that means it affects many of us, and we can't pay our expenses because our income has been affected. That means that we might not be able to afford to come out and fix the AC, the fridge in your unit that just stopped working because we don't have the money to pay the repair person, or even worse, we lose the property completely because we can no longer afford the mortgage or property taxes. Now that said, many of us who are landlords are in fact providing relief to tenants who are unable to pay, just as we are applying for relief from our mortgage payments and expenses that we'd expect to pay. But it's not a blanket situation. It depends on a case-by-case basis. If a tenant works from home and has a job that is not being materially affected by the shutdown, I don't expect them to ask for relief, whereas a tenant who is a restaurant server, I would. It's a case-by-case basis. And trust me when I tell you that no landlord ever wants to have to do an eviction or sit with a vacant property, particularly when they have an otherwise upstanding tenant who has been hit by a crisis, which is in fact why most of us are indeed reaching out and working with tenants through this together to find mutually workable situations. In the end, your post is a good example of having a caricatured stereotype of landlords without an understanding of what we ourselves are dealing with too in its unprecedented crisis. At the end of the day, we're still just human beings like you, also trying to figure out how to get through this together. So that's a pretty good comment to wrap up on. Let me know your guys' thoughts on this situation. If you guys are landlords, what's your situation looking like right now? If you guys are tenants, what's your situation looking like right now? If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button below. Thanks for watching. Hope everybody has a good weekend, and I'll catch you on the next video.